fallen. So, this movie. I was nervous going into Reign of the Supermen for a number of reasons. One is the ongoing spottiness of the track record for DC animated films. But I also had a reason to be hopeful because not only was the death of Superman quite good, it was actually great. It made my top 10 films of last year. It was excellent. And I'm not even that big of a fan of the death of Superman storyline. I'm also not a fan of the Reign of the Supermen storyline, but, you know, coming off the back of that, I had some degree of hope. And, boy, that hope just got squashed. I mean, I was nervous anyway because, I mean, it's got the same director as Death of Superman. I know a lot of people ascribe a lot of power to the director, and they're like, oh, so it will be just as good. Well, no, because Sam, I think it's Liu, is how you pronounce his last name. He is a good animation director, but ultimately he can't elevate a script. He has made very good movies for DC animated. He has made very bad movies for DC animated. And he really is only as good as the script he has. And in the case of Death of Superman, he was working off a very good script. In the case of this, which was not written by the same screenwriters who were involved in Death of Superman, this is not a good script. Now, to be fair, I think they're actually also working off of material that's harder to adapt. While I said flat out I didn't really like the original comic book story of the Death of Superman or the Reign of the Supermen, at least Death of Superman is simple. It's a very straightforward story. Monster shows up, Superman fights it, both die. That's the story. So what that meant was that film, and the reason that film was so good was because it zeroed in on what mattered. Making us understand why Superman is important, why he matters to people, and the impact on those around him when he dies. And it accomplished both of those things better than the comic book version did, and as a result was a really good film. Reign of the Supermen is not a simple story because it is a story of 4 characters who show up and claim to either be Superman in some way or claim a right to his mantle in some way, shape, or form. None of these are characters that, again, I'm talking mostly about the movie here, none of these are characters who we have seen or been dealing with before. And in the characters that we have carrying over are just always playing catch up with what the heck it is that's going on. So, oh God, where do I start with this thing? If you follow me on Twitter, this was the movie that last week, if I'm accounting for when the video will go up, last week or whatever, this was the movie I alluded to where the sequel was such a drop off from the movie that came before that it drove me to drink to get through the movie because I was in pain very early into this film. So this film has, I could teach a film writing course on how not to write exposition and just show people this film. This is some of the worst, clunkiest exposition that I can remember seeing in a long time. And this is a story that requires a lot of exposition. There is so much that needs to explain about all 4 of these characters who show up, and it's just so bad at it. One of the laziest, easy go-to tricks for a film to get some exposition across is a newscast. Whether it be, here's a story about a thing that happened, or you could do it as a debate panel between, a couple of characters, to get the audience up to speed. I'm not saying it never works, but it's a crutch. It's a cliche. It's an exposition dump. That's exactly what it is. It can work, but it's a go-to standard exposition thing. Now, not only does this film open with a newscast debate between two characters to establish that these new supermen are around and how some people feel about them and how long it's been and all this other logistical stuff. The next scene immediately is set in a newsroom as Perry White is assigning news stories, which is barely removed from being the exact same kind of exposition dump, and it's serving the same purpose again, as this time we just see him lay out how it's affected the world in general. Whereas the last characters were dumping us exposition about the new Supermen, now we're getting world exposition getting dumped on us. 2 scenes that are, oh my god. And it doesn't get better. None of it gets better. The way characters establish how they know each other, because most of these characters do have some pre-existing relationship, but we don't know that because it wasn't shown in the previous film. And it's just so awkwardly inserted every time. The writing of this thing is atrocious. It gave me a friggin' headache. I'm genuinely pissed off at this movie at this point, because it is such a drop from the previous one. Plus, also, it retains the basically one and only flaw that I had with Death of Superman, which is this version of Lex Luthor, who is unintimidating and whiny. I haven't really talked about the Supermen that are in this, so why don't we bring up these doofuses? So, not enough time is spent with any one of them for them to feel like a character that we can even care about, much less root for. Honestly, the film, more than anybody, is probably mostly about Lois Lane, which in theory is an angle that could work because, you know, she's the character who knew Clark, knew Superman, and you can filter through her lens to simplify the story a bit. But we're asked by the movie to invest in these 4 supposed Supermen, and you can't. You just can't. First of all, there's Superboy, who is insufferable. He falls into the classic error of the writers tried to deliberately make him irritating to other characters, but that's a really hard thing to do without also making him irritating to the audience. And he was really, really irritating. And then we've got Steel, who's just kind of there. Cool. Well, he's a good guy. That's it. Like, I couldn't tell you, based off this film, off how he's portraying this film, I could not tell you anything about him other than he made his suit himself and he's a good guy. Yay. There's the Eradicator, who is played as a little bit more mysterious, which could have worked if they played up the possibility of him quite likely being the actual Superman, or at least most closely related to him, but they don't play up that mystery. He just kind of shows up and gives wooden delivery intermittently and then goes away again. And then finally there's Cyborg Superman, which, spoilers, and yeah, I'm just going to talk spoilers about this thing because it's stupid, and if I spoil it for you, you don't have to watch it. Spoilers, Cyborg Superman's the bad guy, which honestly, if you know anything about the comics, isn't a surprise anyways, because, you know, that's like that's like trying to hide that Harvey Dent's going to become Two-Face at this point. If you know anything about the comics, then you know, A, that this is Hank Henshaw, who actually we did see in the previous film in one of a decent moments that I thought had some decent setup, except they screw up his motivation too. I'll get to that. So we know it's Hank Henshaw, and we know that he is the bad guy. And his whole angle is not uninteresting, but he does such a bad job of making it believable that people didn't immediately go, really? That's Superman? Because he's acting wonky. And, like, people eventually do cordon onto that, but, like, some of the stuff that gets pulled, I'm like, really? The world at large let that get this far? Seriously? And, okay, so, in Hank Henshaw, they bring in They bring in Darkseid into this. And I don't know why. Like, I have no clue why Darkseid is somehow dragged into this and tied up with Hank Henshaw. There's absolutely no reason. Hank Henshaw's motivation for wanting revenge on Superman and wanting to tarnish his name does in no way require Darkseid. Zip, zero, zilch. And don't give me, well, they had to account for how he got the cyborg. But no, they didn't. No, they didn't. It's comic books. Make something up. Like, first of all, you tease Darkseid, and guess who never actually shows up? It has to be fought directly in this. Darkseid. You tease him and he never shows up. I mean, he shows up on screen. Does he show up on Earth? Does anybody have to fight him? No. Not that that would have saved the thing, because it probably just would have been a repeat of Justice League War, which was boring as hell, and that Darkseid is boring as hell, because he was just an end boss. You can't tease the return of a guy that I wish I hadn't even bothered seeing the last movie he appeared in. I've not gotten this upset by a film in a little while. Oh! The Justice League. The way the Justice League is removed from this narrative so that they can't fix the problem, which I will acknowledge was probably a good thing to do, because otherwise you have to wonder, why aren't they dealing with this? The way in which it's done is the stupidest thing I have seen in ages. Basically, parademons show that, like, we get a portal in the sky and parademons show up and they fight them, and the portal thing, like, loses stability and falls and lands on the Justice League, and they get transported elsewhere, and then it also dissolves on impact. So, like, they're standing here, it falls, they get transported off, and then it's gone. It was already falling when some of the members of the Justice League got into position so that every single one of them was underneath this thing. It's the Flash just stood there. And it's like some of them weren't even going to be hit by this thing. And they walked. And we're like, huh? Oh my God. What the... I swore at this movie a lot. Man. This thing is such a mess. And it is a mess out of incompetence. Because some of the DC animated movies that have been a mess, because this is far from the first one, have been a mess because they tried to tackle too much in one story. Sometimes they're a mess because the very idea that they were trying to tackle just is too complicated and doesn't adapt well. And you could argue that this is a difficult story to adapt, and actually even grant that, but the mistakes made at the scripting level that resulted in this are so basic. Like, screenwriting 101. Did this not get a polish? Like, this feels like a rough draft of a script. This feels like the first pass where you go, okay, roughly this, like, gets us from beginning to middle end. How do we tighten this? How do we polish this? How do we make it more fun and less mechanical? Because the plot exists purely mechanically. Nothing feels motivated by characters. It's just the gears of the plot. Just mechanically twisting. Oh, God. This was awful. And it made worse for how good Death of Superman was. So personally, I'm going to choose to believe that Death of Superman is a standalone film and Superman never comes back. Because, yeah, they do the Superman comes back and they give him the freaking mullet that everybody makes fun of. Why? What? That's a punchline. The fact that he came back in an all-black suit, wielded guns, and had a mullet is a punchline now. Oh. I'm going to give myself an aneurysm. Okay, I gotta stop. It sucks. Reign of the Supermen. Did you see it? I am so sorry if you did. What did you think about it? Whatever your thoughts are, drop something down in the comments. Let's talk about it. Whole bunch of stuff that you can do. Buttons, links. Support me on the Patreon because I need to be able to afford more booze if I'm going to be watching stuff like this. There's other links to check out to the side. Give them a look. It's also okay if you don't, because at the end of the day, folks, you're the council. I just run the meetings, and sometimes I watch this crap so that you don't have to. And until next time, this council is adjourned. Gah!